Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford with Self-Reliant Leadership. You know what? This is number 11 that we've done on our virtual book tour, if you will. What we've done is we've actually invited guests on the show on LinkedIn Live office hours that were past participants on our Crucible expeditions. And the Crucible expeditions were trips where we took executives who needed a digital detox along with veterans who are transitioning out of the military, interested in the business world. And we would love if that experience scaled, but it doesn't. Not everybody can get out in the wilderness and take time off. So what we did is, oops, right there, we wrote a book called Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader: How Grit and Disciplined Duty Forge Indomitable Teams. And the foreword was written by General Stanley McChrystal. And we're really proud of it. It comes out August 20th. And what we tried to do is basically say, hey, here's what happens on every trip. And it was actually 12 different things, and those are the chapters. And what we tried to do is tell a story from the Crucible, something that happened, and then explain how that applies to the business world, tell the rest of the story, and then really summarize by talking about how it applies to leading oneself, leading others, and leading the organization. So this chapter today is about tribal connections, cementing commitments. And I've got a great guest. And also, in the meantime, if you're watching, we would love to know where you're watching from. Just put in the comments where you're calling from. And if you've got any questions along the way, please put those in as well. We'd love to entertain any questions. So this today is Tribal Connections, Cementing Commitments. It's with Lou Rosen. And Lou is a dear friend, a client, and he is currently the Senior Vice President of Commercial Excellence at Brinks, the armored car company. Lou, welcome. Thanks for coming on LinkedIn Live office hours. I appreciate it. I know you're busy.
Dan, thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege and an honor to be here. Very excited to talk with the audience.
Yeah, good. So in addition to being your current role, your whole career has been really in operational excellence, manufacturing, engineering. I mean, how would you, rather than go through your whole resume, how would you classify, like the work you've done, the leadership experiences you've had?
I reflect back, what really gives me the most excitement in my career is being able to work with high performing teams. And I've been very fortunate to lead some of those, even all around the world. In fact, I lived in Asia for 8 years. And the common denominator for me is the ability to really focus on a big, meaty objective,
Mm.
rally people around it, and not always having all the answers, by the way,
Yeah.
and then accomplishing it. That's what's always given me the most excitement and thrill of victory in my career.
Yeah. What do you think has been the biggest challenge? That like the
Oh,
consistent challenge all
yeah.
the time. This is the hard part. It's always the hard part. What would you say that is?
Yeah, I think two pieces. One is, the world is such a dynamic place and so many things are always changing. And then the other piece is just being able to keep people aligned and motivated. It's a
Mm.
constant challenge because we're all humans. We have our own ideas and we also have our own interests and
Yeah.
objectives.
Yeah. And Lou, when you're not working, which isn't very often, when you're not working, what's your favorite thing?
Oh, I love riding my bike. I love skiing and I love spending time with my family.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and here's another question for you. And again, focus on you a little bit. So post pandemic, I mean, the world's changed. The way people engage with work has changed. Um, Actually, we interviewed a woman yesterday on the podcast. It was all about culture, and we're talking about, how different it is. Again, you're a guy that's, I mean, you're a part of you is work ethic. It's loyalty, dedication. How are you finding that? As a leader in today's world with people that not everybody wants to get promoted, not everybody wants to make a ton of money, a lot of motivation to have real balance in their lives. How are you finding that? Because that's different than when you came into the work world.
Jan, that's a really great question, and I have three perspectives on it. And keep in mind, I might be a little old school compared to most. But one perspective is I was working for a company as we went into the pandemic and exited that really required everyone to be on site. And I actually found that was important because in that company, we had thousands and thousands of people working in factories and they were going in every day. So part of me felt like to set the example, the least I could do is go into the office every day. Naturally, that's part of my makeup, but I felt like it was really important too. The second piece, though, is then I went to go work for another company.
Hmm.
And that company wasn't work from home. And on top of that, I've been leading sales forces for many years. So that perspective has said to me, it's really important to establish those relationships and those connections and be able to work it virtually because not everybody can be everywhere at the same time. And then the last perspective I have is just where I think the world's going.
Mm.
And I think it's going to be all about flexibility.
Yeah.
And again, there needs to be, I feel like, some face to face at the end of the day, but I think we can manage through that. It's really important about establishing those connections. And if it's
Yeah.
one thing, back to your prior question that I've learned in my career, it's making the time to build those relationships.
Yeah. It's funny. The way I teased this session to those watching was we want to share how leading and leveraging the social capital that exists between people is the key to connections and cementing commitments. That whole social capital. It's interesting. Today somebody said to me, a person in finance said, um, gosh, I read about influence and in networking and the pie theory of success. You need to be engaged in network. And, they say join a committee. He's like, what a waste of time that is, that you join a committee that's not getting the work done. And then we had a discussion how those relationships that you do when you join a committee are what gets the work done in the future, the work through other people. And that's so difficult. There's so many people these days that seem to be doing their old job. And and we keep saying, gosh, we've got to get better at delegating. But in order to do that, we have to have relationships. We have to develop people first.
You're absolutely right, Jan. And it took me a while to mature and learn that in my career, frankly.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, an engineer for the first part of my career, and then really working in operations. And the problems to solve there are more black and white, still never easy. And then
Yeah.
I moved into general management and sales and marketing roles, and the problems are really great, which I actually like quite a bit.
Yeah.
But what I also realized is brute force isn't going to get you there.
Yeah.
It's really the power of being able to rally people behind a vision and, as you said, influence them for the outcome. In fact, that's one of the things I look for in people as I hire them now. That's one of my gotta haves,
Yeah.
along with driving curiosity. Because, especially, we talked about the virtual world and we talk about working with people all around the globe. People have to want to buy in
Yeah.
and really go that extra step.
Yeah. Well, again, we titled the chapter Tribal Commitment or Tribal Connections, Cementing Commitment. You have to have a connection to have a commitment. When you reflect back, you participated in two crucibles. One was in Moab, Utah, and we had some really wicked wind that was really, I mean, really dangerous wind. And then you were in Western Colorado and Dominguez Canyon. As you reflect on those two experiences with different teams, was there any lessons that you took away as far as connecting with people and developing commitments and, really tending to those relationships that you've brought into the work world?
Short answer is yes. First, Jan, I have to tell you, I feel so lucky to have participated in those two crucibles. They helped me grow personally and professionally that I can't even explain. And I took away so many lessons till I use these days. And if you allow me, I have
Mm.
one story, vivid example I would like to share.
Yep.
But specifically to cementing relationships, what's great about the crucible? You're there with nothing to distract you. So
Mm.
you form these relationships very quickly. And I've taken that to the work site now. And for example, today I'm here visiting a team in Toronto, Canada, and I've met some of these people for the first time. But that taught me how to connect with people much faster, what questions to ask, what to share about me, so we could work together better. But let me give you the example of how we cemented relationships. So on a crucible, Jan usually picks a leader every day to go lead a group of about 8 or 10 people. So that morning, Jan said, okay, your mission, and Lou, you're leading, is to go up this very steep incline to this mesa.
Yep.
And there I am on my team. And I'm thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this? And I got to know everybody. So I was starting to get an appreciation for strengths, weaknesses, what might work, what might not work. So I asked my co-leader to lead the team first. His name is
Hmm.
Mark. And then I was behind to make sure everybody would make it up. So if you can think about this mesa, hundreds of feet up that we're climbing up, and all of a sudden it hit me like a ton of bricks that my team was scattered all throughout this climb. They weren't together. Some people are far ahead, some people are way behind. So I said, oh my gosh, if this isn't an example of not being connected and cementing those relationships. So I got a hold of Mark. I said, Mark, slow down. Let's stop. We regrouped. And again, we communicated on what pace should we go at? Where are we heading? And again, it was with those relationships that I was able to pick up some of those issues and help
Yep.
our team to go through the climb the rest of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mark was an interesting guy. I mean, special forces, was there anything that you learned from Mark? I mean, a much younger guy, without business experience, but, obviously leadership experience, team experience. Was there anything that you took away from him?
Two things. First, boy, that guy can carry a ton of water. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
incredible,
He's
strong guy.
yeah.
But the other thing is, Mark taught me a lot about listening
Mm,
and really keeping calm under pressure. He was just incredible at that. For such a smart guy and a driven guy, he
yeah.
really lived that, and I took away a lot from it, especially as we were discussing how we were going to approach different things as we were leading that day.
Yeah. As I reflect and watching Mark, how he showed up, I mean, it is interesting. You and I have talked about this. There's a crisis all the time. And if we're the leader, everybody's watching us. And are we calm and cool and collected, or are we hair on fire? And, Mark, like a lot of special operations folks that have been out on crucibles, they really, just calm under pressure. They're just, it's interesting because you think, well, gosh, how's that make me feel that he's calm? Well, I'm calm. I know
Right.
everything's going to be okay. I am not freaking out. And it's and in the business world, we tend to think everything. I mean, it feels like sometimes everything's just a fire drill every single day.
Especially when you think about someone in special forces, their fire drill could be life and death too.
Right. Yeah, much different. Well, hey Lou, I'm gonna play a video. It's about 4 minutes long from a crucible, and I'd love for you to watch along with our audience, and then kind of reflect on what you think, and then we'll come back in and join the conversation. No, I like it.
I
friend
love that.
Kirsa wakes up really happy.
I feel like I got the easy. I drew the easy straw here because when you think about teams, how you build teams, the front end when a team first comes together and starts, it's generally the more difficult stage. So a lot of those first steps about coming together, getting to know each other, and getting on the same page and goals aligned, like that's I feel like the harder part of bringing together, and that's all been taken care of, and I feel like everybody's merged really well. So now for me, I feel like I'm like entering into a high performing team as a leader that's already performed well. I just got to get out of their way to a certain extent and make sure that we continue to perform at a high level.
I think I'd say it's unexpected, but actually kind of I knew it was going to happen. The how fast the bond happened between folks, right? I think that has a lot to do with how people are sort of like screened or selected to come to this thing. You already have a subset of people who are just open, who are ready, who are willing, and so none of the conversations were forced. They were all actually like, it just created this super quick bond. So I like to say that was unexpected, but I kind of actually anticipated that would be something which I think is the greatest part about this whole thing.
One of the things that happens out on the Crucible toward the end is people start making commitments to themselves and to others. We call those tribal commitments. And what they are promises to ourselves. One of the things that happened out here, that happens often, is today we talked about, what's a good life? Am I living one? For whose good do I serve? How do I make a difference in the lives of others? Am I spending my time in the right place in the appropriate way? And one of the things that came up today was, how do we make this sticky? It's one thing to come back from this and say, this is a great experience, I've changed, but how do we get it to stick and to create new habits? And one of the things that came up was accountability partners. We have accountability partners out here. We can make promises and people can hold us accountable. That's sort of where the whole idea of a tribal commitment comes in. So part of these commitments that we make to each other, it really is about asking great questions. If you're on one side of the accountability partner, on the other is the commitment to oneself, to ask the right questions, to answer them, to have the courage to answer them. And the third is to have the discipline to act, to create new habits. So that's what we're really asking out here, is to create those sort of tribal commitments. And these commitments are really about, when it comes to the work world, about really two things. One is that we all want to matter. We want our job to matter. We want it to be important. We want to find a noble purpose in that job. And the other thing, again, when it comes to tribal, is we want to feel we're in a place where we belong. And that's what also is important. So from a leadership perspective, we have a personal responsibility to make sure we're fulfilling our commitments, creating new habits, de-emphasizing certain strengths, pulling up some things that we could be used to be more powerful, to sort of remind ourselves that what got us here won't get us there. But what's really important in this is that we stick with these commitments. And as a leader in the business world, it is important that your focus continues to be on helping people feel they matter and that they belong. And that's what a tribal commitment is all about. So take you back, Lou, a little
It
bit?
sure did, Jan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that stood out?
Well, two pieces. First of all, when Xavier talked about the connections, he's so right. Although, as I've reflected on it, and one of my lessons learned, sure, the environment helped a lot. And yes, you did have selection in who attended. But I've actually found taking some of those lessons that I learned and really being intentional and focused, it can work even outside of the crucible. So, invaluable lesson. But the other piece is about the tribal commitments, Jan, and this accountability partner concept. I've actually extended that to where I work, especially with our salespeople as they're learning new skills and capabilities and having someone to keep them in check. And I'd use that with my team a lot too. Very valuable. And what I found is that becomes a secret sauce. So once you establish those connections, my gosh, you can move so much faster. It's almost like having what they call like a mind meld, where you're on that wavelength and you're just so much more high performing. Plus, you really enjoy what you're doing and you feel like your work matters. So that's one of the pieces I strive to bring in myself and build in my teams.
Yeah. You're making me think about Dan Pink's book Drive, and where he outlined what really motivates us. And I really don't think it's changed. He uses the word autonomy. We want to have the freedom, to basically decide how our job's done. We want to do work that matters. We want to know there's purpose and meaning, and we want to grow and develop mastery. When it comes to the autonomy and the interdependence, I mean, how do you balance that, these days? people want autonomy, but, we need them to be team players. They want the flexibility to be remote, but there's times we need them to be face to face. I mean, how are we doing out there, balancing these things that motivate individuals versus what the team needs, the sacrifices it needs people to make?
Boy, that's a loaded question. My initial thought is, when you say how are we in general, I think we're probably doing okay, but not great. And part of it, I think, is this evolution of time, changes in different demographics, I think is
Mhm.
playing a big role in it. What I see happening, especially in the company I'm working in right now, is leadership is very aware of the changing demographics and really trying to be mindful and open. And
Mhm.
I think it's all about goal alignment. That came up in the video we just showed too. Are we aligned and working towards the same direction? Because if we are, we have that direction in mind and we're grounded in that, that makes followership a whole lot easier if people know their role and responsibility. And when they know that, they can have the autonomy. They've got the bounds to work in. I think this also goes back to influence. A lot of people don't realize they have a lot more autonomy. It's
Mm.
really leveraging that sphere of influence to have it. So I think some of it is the environment, but some of it is we
Mm.
as people taking control of what we can control.
Let me ask you something. This is kind of controversial too, I think, and it's kind of a hypothesis I've got going right now, and that is, you know, the old days there was, in a very negative way we'd call it command and control. In a positive way, we would say we're very clear about our expectations. We're being directive. This is exactly what needs to be done. Do you think there's room for negotiation these days when you have, what your team needs to do, yet, is there room to negotiate with them and, give or take on, and then be able to go back to your boss and say, hey, I know you want all this. This is what can be done. Do you think that can or should happen? That's going to get more commitment from people, or do you think that's the first part of chaos?
And I think it's essential. And I'm not saying it's always easy to do, but look, we all know that if we're part of the decision making process, then we're going to buy in and give that much more. Recently, I'll give a great example. Recently, I'm working with our senior vice president of operations, and we worked quite closely together to work on satisfying our customers. And his name is Mike. Mike may have a big challenge in front of him. He's going to need my help, and
Mhm.
vice versa. So we talk through those issues together. And you know what? We always come up with a better solution than if we were doing it on our own.
Yeah. What about though, people that report to you?
Well, I try, not always great, but I try to leave the door open for negotiation.
Yeah.
It, I'd like to start with here's what we're trying to accomplish, and then tell me how we can get there and what you need for resources.
Mm.
And that's where we try to have the negotiation.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the pace of business and everything else, we don't always have enough time to negotiate, but I try to leave the door open because I know in my
Mm.
heart we'll get the best outcome if we
Yeah.
do it together.
I had a boss named Buzz once. He was a great guy and great boss. And I was young. And I literally asked, I'm like, Buzz, you make this look, he was probably 5 years older than me. I'm like, Buzz, you make this look so easy. How do you do it? And he goes, Jan, uh, it's simple. If I help you get what you want, you'll help me get what I want. And I mean, he really took the time to understand what people wanted. You know, he knew I wanted to be promoted. I was really ambitious. I mean, so in a way, I was really easy to manage. Like I was gonna, do what I was told, and I was gonna try to exceed expectations and be proactive. Um, but other people might not have wanted to be promoted. They might wanted to, to win an award, or maybe they just really wanted to have autonomy and kind of be left alone. He was like a master at knowing what people wanted. And these days I think it seems like we don't take enough time to really know the people we work with. And it's not just our subordinates, it's everybody we work with, because we need support at all the different layers. We can't just have support from above or below or sideways. We have to have support all the way around. And that's through relationships with people.
It is, and you're right, Jan. It requires a significant investment in time, but I found over and over that making that investment pays off
Yeah.
tenfold over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I don't think you have to be a golfer, a person that goes for cocktails
Nope.
at 4 o'clock. I mean, I think there's ways to do it within work hours. So, hey, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you and I have talked about this a lot over the years. Again, when we talk about commitments and connections, the whole idea of team one versus team two. And Pat Lencioni, the author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, really popularized this idea. And the concept is that the team you're on, that you're a member of, is more important than the team that you are the leader of. And the whole idea is, if you have a great relationship with team one, you'll be able to provide resources and clear obstacles for team two, that they won't be left alone to fight unwinnable battles across the organization. Again, we've talked about that. Do you think that's more true now than ever? Do you think, the rules on that have changed? I mean, what's your thoughts about this mentality of leaders really taking care of team one versus team two?
Well, I remember when we first talked about this, I was a bit skeptical, to be honest. And so I'm not sure I can answer your question of how it's changed over time. But what I can tell you about my own personal experience is, once I embraced it, what a difference it made. And it really started with me being intentional about where I was spending my time. And at first, I wasn't bought into it, frankly. And
Hmm.
of course, I read Pat's book. But once I started to see the fruits, oh my gosh, was it huge. And the hardest part of this team one, team two is having my team also buy into it. But once we get on board with it, it's things like politics and everything else just vaporize. It really goes back to what you said about that relationships, Jan, and the commitment to the shared vision and building those connections. Because once I establish those with the people that I work with, we're just, again, aligned and on the same page. It makes everything go so much easier. That's not to say there aren't difficult discussions, but it makes it so much easier. And then, to your point, I'm able to provide more for my team, my direct reports, for example, to deliver even more.
Yeah. And this whole idea of a commitment, I mean, it's another way to nurture and develop and earn trust. And you might have heard my podcast co-host Jim Vasilopoulos say, he prefers the word promises versus commitment, because it's a lot harder to break a promise to someone than it is to, not fulfill a commitment. But it really is. I mean, all this stuff goes back to trusting relationships where people have your back, they're loyal, you've got their back. And again, it takes effort. Um, there's a word that I don't think we're always comfortable with, and that is sacrifice. That, if there's other human beings involved, I mean, our best self is being, taking care of other people, being a giver, not a taker. And again, there are times when you're given and given and given, and you're like, I'm kind of tired of giving here. But that really is what a great team member does, what a great leader does. They put others before themselves. And it can be really hard. I mean, there's times by our nature, we can be very selfish and self-serving and self-centered. Do you find that, as a leader, part of our job is to help others kind of fight, that 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 part of ourselves to give and give and sacrifice?
I do. It's a big part of the job. And I think by recognizing this team one concept, that really helps recognize it faster. But not every organization's there, not every person is there.
Yeah.
So it can be tough. Plus, not to mention that a lot of our incentive systems and structures are set up actually to be in what I call a silo versus working together. It's definitely a difficult issue. And what I found is it really goes back to that influence in building relationships.
Yeah.
Because if you've got that foundation in those relationships, there's always going to be tough times, but it makes it that much easier to work through if we've invested in those relationships and those
Yeah.
up front. And then to your point and Jim's point, we're promising to each other, and no one wants to let someone else down. And that's, I think, really the ultimate influence.
Yeah. Do you think it's when you have that, it's easier to ask for help?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I I know if someone comes to me and I've got a relationship with them and asks for help, I'm going to go all out trying to do everything I can to support them and make the journey successful.
Yeah. And the thing that gets underestimated is, I mean, most of us are willing to help others. When we like to help others. It makes us feel good. Sometimes we underestimate um, how much we can help other people by letting them help us.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and sometimes I see it on the Crucible, and maybe we talked about in Moab. There's people, somebody lends a hand, hey, give me your hand, I'll help you up. And they're like, no, 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 I got this. And you're like, hey, you just denied somebody the opportunity to help you. They would have felt great. I know you didn't need help, but let people help you. Did we talk about that when we were out in
We
Moab?
did. And frankly, I witnessed it myself, especially going up. I remember in Moab, and we were going up those riverbeds and going up, climbing with a big heavy pack. You can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
You need help. And what a difference it makes knowing you can trust and rely on somebody.
Yeah. The last Crucible I was on was really a phenomenal one. We had it was mostly women, and the guides were women, and there was one of the guides was a really tall woman that was a professional soccer player before she became a guide. And there was a bunch of times where she would get she had the reach. I'm small guy. I don't have the reach. She would have the reach. She'd get down, and she would crook her leg a certain way so that her thigh was parallel to the ground. And she would say, use my thigh as a step, put your weight there. It's good. I am the first to admit, a few years ago, I would never have done it. And I've been, facing my own hypocrisy saying all this stuff. And she did this a couple of times, and I'm like, Kristen, I will gladly, take the help. And I appreciate it. And I feel no wimpiness or anything about it. And the funny thing, she put her leg out there a bunch of times for a bunch of people. I found out on the last day that this was her first trip since she was really injured in her leg. And, again, it's like, she never, I found this out from the other guide. And, it's just amazing what people will do. And people are always wondering, well, how do I earn the respect of my team? How do I do this? It's like, you got to give more than you take.
Yes.
And Kristen, gave more than she took, and she just gave and I'm sure she was in pain, but she probably got more joy out of helping people and being useful than, sitting there going, yeah, my leg hurts. But, I think there's such application to the work world. And the thing I worry about is, we're all working remote, and it's hard to see other people, struggling, and it's hard not to be self-centered. Hey, as soon as I get off this call, I'm going to go have lunch. And, it's a lot of times it's all about you. And, our work is never about us. It's about the team serving customers. That's what it's about.
It absolutely is. I see that firsthand every day.
Well, let me, I got a couple sentences I want to read that Jackie Jordan and I have from this chapter of the book. And it really relates to another amazing woman named Meg Zeringer. She was a Coast Guard officer, and she summed up how connections she made led to validation and later award-winning success as an executive. And here's what she said: "What I learned from the Crucible changed my personal and professional life for good, and it completely blew all my other leadership training out of the water. In my military career, I was given commendations, was lauded on all my evaluations, and I was praised by senior Coast Guard leadership. None of this gave me the sense of validation that I got from the Crucible." And, and again, I do not take credit for this. She had an amazing team that saw, where, her confidence wasn't, and they boosted her. I mean, and it wasn't at my direction or anything. I mean, this team just rallied around her, and they saw her. I mean, she was seen in a way I don't think she ever felt like she was seen. And that's what happened. I mean, these people weren't focused on them, they were focused on each other. And anyway, I mean, it's one of my favorite quotes, of anybody that's been on a Crucible, because I know the training that she had, and I know what that means to get commendations and different things. Lou, as we kind of wrap up, I mean, any closing thoughts that you would have on, the team, the connections, the commitments that are really, things that you've learned over the year that you'd like to pass on to aspiring leaders?
Few ideas. Number one, take the time to build the relationships, investing in those upfront. And it's never too late, by the way. Investing in those is so valuable, both investing in yourself and in that other person. I think the second thing is not to be afraid to confront the difficult issues with other people, especially once you have that relationship, because that's going to make us stronger and build those connections. It's sometimes going through adversity that really makes us stronger on the other side. And the last thing, Jan, is again, thank you so much for having me on Two Crucibles. And they've really touched my life, made me a better leader, a better person. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to be there with you and the teams I've been with.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lou. It's, my pleasure, my honor. We've done 25 so far over the last 10 years. And, we're really, proud of the work that we've done. And, I got to tell you, there's not a single Crucible I ever come back from and basically pat myself on the back. I get done with those and I do all the woulda, coulda, shoulda, talk in my head. And what I've learned, and I think I've shared this with you, Lou, is, for me, the best way I can serve as a leader is to really design the environment. I mean, there's other people that are way better than me one-on-one with people and 1-on-20 with people. And, I think, when we approach things, I mean, you need designers, people that can create the right environment, that can really design, the structure, the process, the incentive, how the people, the capabilities. And then there's people that are really, great one-on-one, 1-on-20. And you need all those types. And it's kind of like Tom Rass said, the author of Strength to Strength. That book isn't about you finding your strengths as much as it is about you finding strengths in other people. And I think that really is the job. If we want to influence people, we want to have great relationships, it's about finding strengths. And you talked about it, Mark could carry, 40 pounds of water. I mean, among other things. I mean, everybody's got their thing. So again, I really appreciate you being on, Lou. As I've said many times, I've appreciated our personal relationship even more than our professional relationship. And I've learned a lot from you. Next time, we're going to have Mike Petchel on, who is on Crucible #1. Mike will be on August 6th, and we're going to talk about the crux, bringing it all together. In the meantime, Lou, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I should do one other thing on the book. It's available August 20th, but you can pre-order it now. So Jackie Jordan and I would be very appreciative, and we hope it can help a lot of people. So All right. Well, thanks everybody. And we will see you next time. Lou, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.